And we're back to sharing lessons from 1 Samuel 25 to 27. And it is in these chapters that we meet Abigail. That was a highlight of it for me. How about you? But before then, let's just dive in. And chapter 5 began with news of Samuel's death and his burial at Ramah. And we meet Nabal, whose name, by the way, means foolish. So why would you name someone foolish and expect them to be wise? That was my main question. So sometimes with these Bible names, I wonder if they named them afterwards to say, okay, this guy was foolish, so let's call him Nabal. But yeah, that was so weird. So he was wealthy but foolish because of his ungracious reply to David's humble request for refreshment and supplies for his soldiers and himself after they had protected his sheep shearers in the wilderness. And so he was going to be killed. David was upset because of his, the fact that he was so ungracious to him when he sent his servants with the request. David allowed his anger and need for revenge to drive him towards exterminating Nabal and all his male relatives. But Abigail, his wife, who was wise and beautiful, intervened. She was courageous and demonstrated respect and submissiveness to David, and he responded to that and spared, Nabal and his people. But much more than that, David was humbled, and he relented, and he showed that he had a teachable spirit for the fact that he listened to Abigail, and then he also heeded her advice. He admitted that God sent her to keep him from sinning by taking revenge for himself instead of trusting God to do what he said he will do. God showed his faithfulness by striking Nabal dead when Abigail told him. He first, was like stone, so who knows, it must have been a stroke of some sort. And 10 days later, he died in verse 38. After that, David asked for Abigail's hand in marriage. Like, I try to romanticize it. To say, oh, this beautiful lady that I saw, now that husband is dead, yes, you come and marry me. And she accepted, so they got married. Also, what noting was, we found out that Saul had given his daughter Michal, who he had given to David, to someone else. So, but then he also had another wife called Ahinoam or something. So, yeah, as we know, they always had multiple wives in those days. In 26, we see those Ziphites up to their snitching ways again, because they go to Saul to let them to report on David's whereabouts. Now, I bet that we all thought after that encounter with Saul at the end of 24 would see Saul well and truly leave David alone, but alas, that was not so. Saul would see Saul still chasing David down, and it was just crazy. So now he had taken his armies, and he was, based on information from the Ziphites, going to look for David. So David and Abishai, his brave man, who were able to gain access into Saul's camp, where he and his soldiers were sleeping at night, because God gave them a deep sleep that night. Again, we see David refuse to take matters into his own hands and kill Saul, even though Abishai told him that, listen, God has given this guy to your hand. But then obviously the wisdom from the other time he applied in this situation and didn't attempt to kill Saul. Instead, he took his spear and his water jug and then, went to the other side of the mountain to say, okay, guys, I had another opportunity, but I didn't take it. Surely Saul by this time could recognize that David meant him no harm and didn't intend to kill him. And like the last time, he relented. But for now, we know that Saul doesn't really give up on his pursuit of David and his plan to kill him. But David wasn't convinced that he sat down and reasoned it and was like, this guy is going to try and kill me, and who knows, he may kill me. And he went over to Philistine territory to seek refuge, to hide out from Saul. And when Saul heard he had gone into Philistine territory, he abandoned his pursuit and went back. David went back to Achish in the city of Gath. Now remember, this was the city that he went to at first and then pretended to be insane when they recognized him. But we see here he goes back and he asked for a place for him and his men and their families to settle. And Achish this time gave him Ziklag. Ziklag was in the land of Judah, former Judah, but during the Philistine race it had been captured. Initially, Ziklag, if you remember, was given to the Simeonites, but then obviously because of the, let's call it, amalgamation of the Simeonites and the children of Judah, it was in Judah's territory. And David lived there for 16 months and still continued his campaigns against enemy territories around the southern part of, the Judean territory. But he kept the details of his conquests from Achish. And he did this by making sure that he killed every human in those places and only went back with the spoils. So the animals, the clothes, the precious things, and he'll take them back to Achish, right? And Achish actually presumed that the Israelites now hated David and that he'll have him as a slave forever, because he believed that David was raiding Israelite towns and cities and bringing back the spoils to him, if only he knew. So that's where chapter 27, kind of wrapped up. And here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. God grants wisdom for preservation. In chapter 25, we see God walk through Abigail to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. But more than that, to keep David from sinning against him by taking revenge. Abigail operated with God-given discernment, because I believe discernment only comes from the Lord, and she used that to de-escalate a potentially volatile situation. And God always does things like that. So I think we need to be aware. This is what I took away from it, that I need to be aware and always just see where God may have me, make a different decision when something happens. Because David believed that he was and probably was well within his rights, but that course of action would have caused a negative reaction. But God used Abigail, using the spirit of discernment, to de-escalate it. That was cool. I loved that story. Thank you for joining me today. Tomorrow we'll go back to our Psalms, and we'll be reading Psalm 17, 35, 54, and 63. And I'll see you here. Have a good day. Bye.